And we have our first attendee. Awesome. And now the room is starting to fill up. We've got some early birds joining us. Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Where are you guys joining us from? I'm really curious to hear it. If you want to drop your location in the chat, I'd like to see and peruse where everyone's joining from. Hopefully we have some people from around the world. I'm in the Bay Area myself. Welcome, welcome. For those of you returning, thanks so much. And for those of you who are new, hi, my name is Maddie Watt. I work at the Hive, and you are in for a real treat today. We have an incredible panel for you guys. So we're just going to give it one more minute here before I kind of start to go over the ground rules for today, and then we will hurry through our intro so you guys can get on to the main event. Awesome. Okay, great, guys. So keep dropping your location in the chat. I'm excited to see where you guys are joining us from.
We have our great friend Val Berkovici joining us today.
Hey, hey Val, Livermore. Okay, I'm a Pleasantonian, so we're neighbors. But right now you're in Canada, I see. Very nice, very nice. I hope you're beating the heat. Great. So you guys, I just want to remind you that this session is going to be recorded. So if you have a friend that wanted to attend and couldn't, or a colleague that was really interested, you're going to be able to send them the recording link tomorrow. That recording link will automatically be emailed out to you. So don't worry if you have to hop off early, or if you have some friends that wanted to see, they'll be able to catch it later. Also, we love questions. We want you guys to ask your hardest and best questions for this panel and really kind of, make them sweat for it and work for it. So definitely ask questions. But to ask a question, I need you guys to do me a favor. I need you to use the Q&A button. So if you look at the screen and you're going to see all these videos, you'll see a ribbon, like a banner, and it's going to have different buttons on it. You're going to see a Q&A button. Please use that button and then ask your question in that, because that way all the questions are in one nice place for our moderator, Steve. And that way your question doesn't get lost in the chat. I would hate for you guys to not get your question asked because it gets lost in all of the chat. So without further ado, we are going to get started, and I'm going to just really briefly talk about what the Hive think tank does. And then I'm going to send it over to TM Ravi, the Hive's managing director and founder, before he goes ahead and introduces Steve, our moderator, and the rest of the panel. Ravi, do you mind pulling up the slides for me real quick? Yeah. Thanks so much. So for those of you who don't know, if it's your first time here, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Maddie Watt. I'm the Senior Manager of People and Programs at the Hive. And one of the main things I do is lead the Hive think tank. So the Hive think tank is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. And we're trying to foster a dialogue around all things AI and data related. And we're holding events about every other week, except this week we doubled down and we did 2 events. I don't know if those of you are here who are with us on Tuesday, but we just had another amazing privacy sort of webinar. So I can also send you guys the video link for that in the chat. We would love for you to join our ecosystem by joining us on Meetup. I will send you the link for that, as well as our blog space. You can go to the next slide, Ravi. Thank you. And we definitely want to give a special thank you to our sponsors, especially Avanta Ventures, who is co-hosting this with us today. And Steve is a partner at Avanta Ventures. If you want to learn more about sponsorship, go ahead and drop me an email. I will put that in the chat as well. And now I'm going to just show you guys really quick what we've got going on. So next week, we've got an incredible panel. Ravi is going to be moderating it, and it's going to be about the digital revolution in Southeast Asia. So we're going to be co-hosting this with the Hive Southeast Asia. Next slide, please, Ravi. Thank you. And then we've got a bunch of events coming up, a lot of them related to sustainability. So we're going to have a special fireside chat about the resilience of the energy industry with digital transformation on Thursday, the 15th. I'll drop you guys a link for that. Next slide, Ravi. And we're going to have a huge panel on investing in a sustainable energy future on the 22nd, the following week. And then the last one, and we're starting a new special track. It's a new series. It'll be quarterly, and it's going to be an AI reading club. And we're going to have a guest panel who will pick different pieces of literature and publications that are focused on AI and different sectors or themes or specialties of it. So this first one will be on Thursday, the 29th, and it'll be focusing on probabilistic programming. So I'll drop all these links. We hope you can join us. And without further ado, here's TM Ravi.
There's one more event.
Just kidding. There's one more event. Sorry, guys. We just have so many coming up. We're also doing our how computer vision applications are transforming the industrial segment. And we're going to be co-hosting that with TIBCO, who is another one of our sponsors. So that will be at the end of August. And I will drop the link for that. Okay, now I'm really done. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Maddie. And so just very briefly, introducing the Hive. The Hive is a venture capital entity. And in particular, we're a subclass of venture capital called Venture Studio. We're very focused on leveraging AI, data and AI to drive transformation, sustainability across a wide variety of industries, including kind of two of the areas that today we'll talk about, InsurTech and cybersecurity. And so in addition to our presence here in the US, we have separate entities in Brazil, in India, in Southeast Asia, very soon in the Middle East, and next year in Europe. I'm especially excited to introduce my good friend and colleague, Steve Bernardes of Avanta Ventures. Avanta is basically a CVC of CSAA, the insurance company. Steve's focus is, of course, on InsurTech, but related areas like mobility, IoT, AI, blockchain, and so forth. Prior to Avanta, Steve was at Onset Ventures for a number of years, and I first connected with Steve when he was with Microsoft here. And so if you are going to tweet about it, please use the hashtag Hive Data if you're going to tweet about today's event. And with that, let me hand it over to Steve.
Thank you, Ravi and Maddie. Avanta Ventures is privileged to partner with the Hive. And so I appreciate the opportunity here. And Ravi, you're betraying my age here. So again, just a quick background on Avanta Ventures and myself. We are the corporate venture arm for CSAA Insurance, which is one of the large AAA insurers. We're an early stage venture investor in InsurTech, but also mobility and other areas that are related to finance or risk, including things like cybersecurity. Today's panel discussion will explore the ransomware threat. How do businesses and enterprises manage that risk? What cybersecurity defense innovations are emerging to combat it? And how can cyber insurance help mitigate that risk? As Maddie mentioned, we're going to have a quick overview of the problem space, a lively discussion amongst these esteemed panelists, and then the last 15 minutes we're going to devote to Q&A. So as Maddie mentioned, use the Q&A button in Zoom, and we'll capture those questions and go through those at the end. So why is this topic even important? It's if you read the news, that shouldn't really be a question, but the question is really, how big is this ransomware problem? According to Hiscox, 43% of the 6,000 companies it surveyed had suffered a cyber attack last year, which is up about 38% from the prior year. And 1 in 6 of those attacks was a ransomware attack. Last year, the amount of ransomware demanded grew from kind of 100,000s for lower end businesses up to mid to high 7-figure ranges. And at the end of last year and into this year, we've seen ransomware demands growing into the tens of millions. So this really is a problem from a dollar standpoint. And hackers, they're not indiscriminate. They're in this to make a buck. It's a business. So obviously they're targeting businesses, from the Colonial Pipeline attack to JBS, which is the world's largest meat supplier, which had to suspend operations at 10 plants and paid out an $11 million ransom, to one of our industry, my industry, compatriots, CNA Insurance, reportedly paid a $40 million ransom to regain control of their systems. But even nonprofits, hospitals, Scripps Health was forced to spend weeks recovering from a ransomware attack with missed appointments and the inability to access patient records. Even governmental entities, Tulsa, Oklahoma, their fire department had to go back to using pen and paper and map books to handle emergencies. But the New York Metro, the Alaska court system, county governments have all been disrupted by these types of cyber attacks. And this has had an impact on insurance. Cyber insurance premium has doubled from 2016 to last year. Claims have been up from 6 million claims in 2016 to 21 million this year, which outpaces premium growth, which is kind of scary. The loss ratio for cyber insurance has gone from below 50% to above 70% last year. Again, that's not a good trend. And premiums are therefore predicted to grow 25% year over year. And I'm sure Jack will have more of a discussion around that. So obviously a big problem, but all is not lost. We've got an esteemed set of panelists here who can cover perspectives on how enterprises think about protecting themselves, how cybersecurity software is evolving to address the threats, and how cyber insurance can help businesses manage the business and economic risk. So, in terms of this panel, I'd like to introduce three folks. Ben Suter represents kind of the voice of business or the voice of the enterprise. He's a principal project manager for cybersecurity at the Electric Power Research Institute. EPRI is an independent nonprofit for public interest energy and environmental research that focuses on electricity generation, delivery, and use. And he works with some of the largest utilities across the country. As a voice of the cybersecurity software development community, we have Duncan Greatwood, who's the CEO of Zage Security. Zage offers a decentralized platform for protecting industrial IoT or Internet of Things with a zero trust protected fabric. And then last but not least, we have the voice of a cyber insurer. So Jack Kudale is the founder and CEO of Cowbell Cyber. Cowbell combines an inside out and an outside in continuous risk assessment technology approach, which allows them to deliver cyber insurance coverages tailored to individual customers based on the risk exposures they have, and allows policyholders to understand and improve their cyber risk posture by understanding their analysis of their cyber stack. So let's dive in. Why don't we start with the voice of the customer? So I'm directing this to you, Ben, but would love to hear Jack and Duncan as well. We can imagine how critical it is to protect electrical infrastructure from hackers. Can you give some sense of the magnitude of the ransomware or general cybersecurity challenge for your business? How do you quantify this cyber risk for your board?
Well, yeah, the risk is enormous, and I think the industry as a whole really feels the weight of that risk right now, especially in light of things like the Colonial Pipeline attack, and making sure that they're able to respond. So, yeah, quantifying the risk, I think it's very high, and one of the things I was looking at prior to this is I was trying to find some economic numbers just on the effects of like the Colonial hack, which unfortunately aren't out yet, but I'm sure are unimaginably high, and so nobody wants to be that next event that transpires and affects everybody. So how do we approach it with the board? One of the things I think is really interesting is the variety of opinions you get at that level, at the executive level, at the board level, especially with Jack on here with the insurance perspective. You see some folks very quickly, they say, all right, if I think if I see an attack, I'm going to pay the insurance, or I've already got insurance and I'm going to pay the ransom and I'm going to move on down the road. And I'm not even going to think about it because I have insurance. And then others get caught up on the considerations on the ethics side of well, are we contributing to issues? But then there's shareholder buy-in, and what's the effect on shareholders if it's a IOU? And so, yeah, it's just lots of perspectives there on things that are everybody's grappling with right now. We've had just tons of meetings lately at the executive levels where all these utility executives are talking, and everybody recognizes there's big issues that they don't necessarily think they've got all the answers for, and are really, you know, concerned and interested in getting good plans for you know, when something does happen.
Thanks, Ben. You know, one of the data points that I saw was that 80% of the companies that paid a ransom actually were hit again. And you know, you almost wonder whether there's a dark web list of people who have the propensity to pay and the insurance that hackers can then retarget again and again. And so the question is, do you have a policy around paying ransom, kind of, you know, paying ransoms?
If that's you know, directed at me, I personally don't have a policy, and I don't think EPRI does either. You know, on it, it's going to be up to an individual utility, and you know, to make those decisions. And I'm sure a huge number of things are going to come into play, because you know, if you someone ends up in a situation where the lights are out, you know, then you know, very quickly, you know, I can see how, you know, people can justify these things, and you know, the sugar gumdrops and things like that don't speak as well, you know, if people are hurting. So it'll be, I don't know that there's a policy, a uniform policy, especially across the board, but I know it's something everybody's grappling with to understand.
Makes sense. Thank you. Duncan, trying to understand how you would help Ben. So, and I would love to understand, maybe if you could give a little bit of background on Zage, and set that context first. But how would you, you know, advise enterprises to think about, you know, the ransomware challenge?
Yeah, so I think there's, you know, as Ben said, the reality is that if you have a public service that is stopped, then people will pay ransoms pretty quickly in that circumstance, and it's very hard to make a contrary argument. Even if you make one in principle, in practice, pressure just becomes too intense. So really the point of Zage is twofold. One is to stop these attacks from happening. That may sound like a sort of painfully obvious statement, but actually it's remarkable how little is done today to prevent these attacks or to contain them. What if they gain a foothold? A lot of investment has been made in detection solutions, which of course is totally appropriate. It's good to have that visibility into what's going on. But what Zage is doing is blocking attacks and providing the underpinning to allow innovation and change to continue to happen without creating yet new attack vectors and yet new exposure. And as the Hive would emphasize, I think there's tremendous change going on in real world operations, and we're seeing it in electrical utilities with the adoption of renewables and you know, regular DRs and microgrids and everything else. We're seeing it in space, where you know, we have projects there. We actually just engaged with a water utility in one of the largest cities in Italy. They have a problem with exposure in their drinking fountains, and those things date back about 2,000 years. So they have the ultimate legacy infrastructure problem there that they need to protect. And it's very common in real world infrastructure to see a huge mix of incredibly sophisticated modern equipment and older equipment that was probably created when the idea of having a password or, you know, having really solid security almost didn't exist. So we're bringing a mesh fabric to bear on these issues, and we essentially aim to authenticate and to control through authorization every interaction that happens in the digital infrastructure. And that's very different to the perimeter or permissive trust approaches that have been used in the past. And it means if somebody does hop over the fence, the literal or metaphorical fence gets inside your infrastructure, then at least there's a very strict limit on what they're able to do. And that kind of zero trust approach or unpermissive approach is going to stop a lot of these attacks, and it's going to limit them, and it's going to put companies in a better position to respond. If you look at Colonial, the reason they shut down for a week was not because they necessarily had a huge breach of their physical infrastructure, it's because they just had no way of preventing contagion. And once there was any interruption and any penetration into their systems, they had no real way of knowing whether that was going to result in the whole thing being lost. So containment, blocking attacks, and then underpinning the flows of data backwards and forwards that are needed to get more efficient grid optimization, grid balance, that are needed to get satellites to work better together, are needed to maintain the pressure of Roman area water fountains. All of these things are stuff that Zeta is addressing.
Well, I'm rather alarmed to hear that there are ransomware attacks in space. But
I think there's a mix of nation state worries and ransomware worries. And sometimes the boundary between these two can actually be a little blurry. We have a number of water utilities that have been attacked by Iranian hackers, and it is very unclear whether that's a bunch of high schoolers having fun and trying to make a few bucks, or is it sponsored by the government? Same thing in space. There's a lot of nation state concern there, of course, but there's also, one of the common attack scenarios that people worry about is there's so many small scale satellites in low orbit now. What happens if somebody hacks a bunch of those satellites and just drives them into each other and starts spreading debris through the lower orbits? That would make everybody else's job incredibly difficult. So there are definitely potential attacks that can happen in all of these domains.
It really speaks to the attack surface expansion that's going on. If any potential attack surface hasn't been kind of shifted left, where they started, the development of that technology with a security mindset, then trying to patch it afterwards can be, or manage it afterwards can be much more challenging.
Yeah, that's true. I will say that part of what we're about is enabling people to overlay modern security on these often more traditional systems and architectures. In very few cases in real world operations do you get the chance to sort of say, just demolish my auto factory, I want to build a new one. That really doesn't happen too much. So, what we can do is we can start to impose individual identity level control. Sometimes we have to add little bits of equipment here and there to control, to do that enforcement. But the reason I'm mentioning my Italian friends is it could be oil and gas field as well. Probably 90% of their equipment is sort of pre-cyber concern actually. And so they have to have a practical way of adding security to what they've got. They can't just replace it.
Makes sense.
Going along your adder there, Steve, of expanded attack surface. This is one of the things that I spent a lot of time worrying about, is the fact that we have these areas and we do a lot of folks work really hard to protect them, but at the end of the day, somebody comes in and gets a new coffee maker or a Peloton bike, and all these things have just have a full-fledged operating system on them now, and so you can do all these things and then get completely defeated by somebody meaning well, installing something that somebody wants, but defeats a lot of security practices. And so that's been what I've as I've thought about things like zero trust, I've come to the conclusion that it's almost everything's got to be able to survive just sitting out on the open internet. If I can't trust that I can actually just plug it into the raw internet, then I'm not there yet, because there's so many attack surfaces and so many unknowns that can just show up on networks today, I feel like.
Yeah, no, we would strongly agree with that perspective, and it's actually a thought experiment we always encourage our customers to do. If it's not safe on the internet, then do you really believe it's safe in your corporate network? Part of the approach that we're bringing, or the reason we use this metaphor of the fabric as well, is that it's a strength in numbers play. The more nodes of fabric, the more bigger the mesh becomes, the stronger it becomes. And this is really important sort of general purpose approach. Gartner have made it their #1 cyber trend for 2021, I think now. But the point of the mesh is, as systems proliferate, if you're as strong as your weakest link, you're almost bound to be extremely weak, whether it's the fish tank feeder that was used to hack a casino a couple of years ago, or Peloton bike or whatever else. So in a strength in numbers approach or a mesh approach, we have voting amongst the nodes using a protocol XDR-PP, and we allow the nodes to actually vote amongst themselves, saying, should a certain thing be allowed? If we have to store a password, we'll scatter the pieces of the password around the node. So the more nodes you have, harder and harder it becomes for the attacker to compromise the system as a whole. And this is just an aspect of strength in depth, but it's an important one because the Internet of Things is scaling exponentially. And so any approach that doesn't take advantage of that scale or is made weaker by scale is really problematic. And so, having security that gets stronger with scale is one of the real requirements in this world, I think.
For sure. I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ben. That's wonderful.
I was just going to say, so kind of, listening to your solution and everything, one of the, concerns that we have, sort of on the utility side is because we have so many legacy devices, right? With thousands of legacy devices, a lot of times you end up, in order to accomplish some of these extra features and security sets, you end up with bump in the wire solutions that go in front and add that extra layer of protection, which, unfortunately, like the worst thing is scale. Like it's really difficult to scale that, across substations and plants and things where there's just, thousands and thousands of endpoints that are actually connected. And then you also end up in reliability issues as well with bump in the wire things. And so, I think those are two really big challenges that we've seen, as we've been exploring technologies and things to help utilities in these spaces to address, how do we handle this legacy stuff, and also at the same time, what do we pushing on, for the vendors to give us down the road so that we've got the capabilities to build that in the next generation. But there's still just so much stuff out there already.
Yeah, no, that's right. And in some cases it's possible to do virtual bumps in the wire. In some cases, you can put your bump in the wire at the tower and service multiple downstream systems and so forth. But there's no doubt that it's possible to make it practical to deploy zero trust, but it is a gradual process. And just like in conventional IT, the world is not going to suddenly leapfrog to be 100% zero trust with perfect, identity level security in all possible dimensions right away. But even making significant strides in that direction with much higher level of granularity of protection, at least that means that, the first PLC to go down in your substation doesn't mean that within 5 minutes every other PLC is bust as well.
So it sounds like there's interesting approaches to address the problem from a technical perspective, Duncan and Ben, but I hazard to guess none of them are perfect. And so, and getting back to the discussion, Ben, we had around the board and how you think about the risk for maybe for your customers or your electric utility partners, how do they get comfortable? I think the role for cyber insurance has to be something they need to consider. If you posit that they are going to get attacked, and that some of those attacks are going to be successful, how do they handle that eventuality? And I think, Jack, I'd love to hear kind of how Cowbell thinks about kind of the role of cyber insurance, not only after a attack, but even before a hack.
Yeah, sure. And, it's great to be with you, Steve, and thanks for having me at the Hive. Speaking as just a quick follow-up from Ben and Duncan conversation, there is no business that's immune to cyber attack. You could be a really large power grid or an electrician using Office 365. I mean, the risk is there for everyone. If you look at a traditional cyber insurance, it's been there for a long time, as far as you can go back, but more or less, a lot of cyber insurance was really underwritten based upon the employee size and revenue of the company. And as we all can agree on this panel, that is not really a representation of the cyber risk that is not only present there, but it's also evolving on a day-to-day basis. So I want to just maybe take a step back on just a cybersecurity life cycle of any organization. I mean, you think about all the way from prevention of a cyber event to detecting that cyber event. But then there is this next phase on the other side of the event, which is the response and recovery. And so, I don't think we have a lot of people who are looking at cyber insurance as a replacement of their cybersecurity controls today, but I think it has become a true business risk in terms that, businesses are really looking at cyber insurance as an extension of their cybersecurity strategy and just yet another tool to transfer the risk from the insured to the insurer and back to the reinsurer. And so when you talk about this response and recovery, the model has improved so much over, especially with last 4 or 5 years, and really heightened its impact over the last 6 months, especially the market hardening. You mentioned the ransomware on the rise, the premiums doubling, certain players exiting the market, the capacity hardening and whatnot. But all of this really requires a unique approach to how you underwrite cyber risk, which is unlike any other risk. And if you think about many insurance lines, beyond life insurance, cyber line of insurance is the only line that has an organic growth. That means the take-up rate, on a high end, over $1 billion, many companies have cyber insurance. If you look at small to medium-sized businesses, many companies do not have cyber insurance. In fact, half of our policyholders are first-time cyber insurance buyers. The point I'm making is, as you underwrite the cyber risk, and essentially cyber insurance is a financial protection from financial losses on the other side of cyber insurance. But over the last 4 or 5 years, every insurance is stepping up. Our cohorts, some of our competitors, traditional carriers, and it's not just a cyber insurance policy. It's not just a notification expense or credit monitoring or ransom payment or a business interruption thereof. The insurers are actually extending their value creation into what we call pre-breach services, in terms of being able to do a continuous risk assessment of the policyholder, being able to offer insights and recommendations on how to improve their cyber posture, perhaps being able to spot the zero-day exploits so you can further prevent any of the losses. But essentially, cyber insurance as an industry, which I would say is 1/20th of the cyber security market overall, has really stepped up to provide beyond cyber insurance as a policy, but yet it will not, and it has never been, become a replacement for cybersecurity controls that businesses need to implement in a very, very heightened threat landscape out there today.
That makes perfect sense. And I think about my parent company. We insure autos and homes, and if there's a claim, we write a check to the policyholder, to the auto body repair shop. You're living in a much different world. If there's a ransomware attack, Can you talk to us a little bit about how you handled that kind of a claim? Are you negotiating with the criminal? Are you sourcing Bitcoin? Are you working with the government? How does all of that play out?
Yeah, it's all of the above, interestingly, and it's a good compared to homeowners and personal auto, which are tremendous industries. When it comes to cyber insurance, you're really looking at, it's a promise. Insurance is a promise to pay, as you know, and businesses buy cyber insurance cover so the claims can be paid. And so that's the job number one, is making sure that the businesses are empowered to continue to do what they do, despite all of these cyber threats that are out there. So you're looking at anywhere from whether it's a supply chain attack, whether it's a Microsoft Exchange vulnerability or SolarWinds, or recently there was a VMware vulnerabilities being exploited. First and foremost, being able to understand ahead of the game that there is something going on, using data, using AI, using proprietary ratings factor. It's kind of a new way of underwriting cyber, and being able to get to your policyholders beforehand to see if there is an opportunity to prevent certain events. Now, things happen, and we see it in the newspaper every day and on a television. Friday afternoon, 5:30 p.m. you do have, and it's not just ransomware, by the way. There are so many other different type of events that could occur. But let's take an example of a ransomware attack at 5:30 p.m. on Friday. You may be subject to ransomware attack, but then you never heard of a threat actor. You don't know how to secure Bitcoin as a policyholder. So the first call you're making is making to your insurance provider. And this is where we start our action. And in terms of being able to assign an immediate breach coach, the first 24 hours and maybe first 48 hours are mission critical in any ransomware attack. Whether how much this exposure could be, what type of business interruption we're looking at, should we shut down all our systems? So being able to guide our policyholders throughout that cycle, whether it's all the way from assigning a breach coach, then having a communication with the threat actor, understanding how much data, do you have a backup, and is it encrypted, can you still access the backup? There's data restoration, do we need to have any regulatory compliance in terms of notifications to the government? Do you have supplier employees and other dependent ecosystem with you that you need to really start notifying them that you are under attack? But most important for us is how do we get back our insured back in the business, despite that event that just occurred. So first 24 to 48 hours. So we do everything, all of that. Of course, whatever is part of the insurance coverage that is applicable in that situation. But we use a lot of third-party vendors, people who are expert in negotiating ransomware, people who are expert in forensics, attorneys, legal, who represent that insured, and all type of help until the time that the claim is completely settled, the business is back online, and then continue to provide them new recommendations on how do we avoid this type of situation going forward, what things that we need to do together. And that is the job of an insurer, beyond just selling the policy to the business. And we feel that we have taken a very unique approach to underwriting. So that the coverage is always aligned to the evolving cyber risk. Whether it's and there's a lot of data, of course, there's a lot of models, machine learning, there's algorithms, but more importantly, how do you make use of that normalized data into being able to price and maintain that security posture for that business? So what we do as an extension of cybersecurity lifecycle has become very mission critical for businesses at the board level, as you previously mentioned.
Interesting. And, I'm going to ask this of all three of you. Where do you see the industry moving towards preventing and managing this better? It doesn't feel like there's a lot of, there's kind of an easy solution here. Defense in depth, is challenging. I was at the RSA conference last year, and right as the COVID was breaking out, there was more than 700 vendors there. So if I'm Ben and one of Ben's electric utility customers, how do I even manage, and think about sorting through all of them to build my defenses in a deterministic way, if there is such a thing. And if there, Duncan, you had mentioned that there's solutions that don't get more effective with scale are not going to be the answer. So is there actually a future here are there solutions that do get better with scale? Is Zero Trust one of them? Are there others as well?
Sure, I can take a first crack on that. You've taken the great risk, Steve, of asking me multiple questions here, which guarantees
yes,
that I will only remember one of the things you asked. But look, I don't think we should abandon all hope. Nor do I actually think the sky is falling even today. There are very severe risks out there. Companies will get better at managing those risks. They will have response plans. They will have recovery plans, just like they would in the event of an earthquake destroying their data center or something. So that will get better, and it's important it does get better, as we've said here. I think not going to RSA might be my second piece of advice, because it is fantastically confusing. But really, sort of, what are the key principles that you want and the key requirements that you want to address in your cybersecurity strategy? And I think Zero Trust has to be one of those key principles. And I think strength with scale has to be another. And, who are really the people who are leading and doing new things, new innovations in those spaces? There is so much legacy vendor in this area that you just have to be a little bit careful not to get sort of trapped with, the people who got you into the mess are not always the people who are going to get you out of it, would be the slightly pointy way of putting it. They may participate, but, they're less likely to be leading the charge in terms of finding, kind of deeper solutions or more innovative solutions. So I think it's like any complex IT problem, you have to work it, you break it down into the key principles you want to include, you find the people that you can learn from, could be other peers in the industry, could be vendors, could be consultants, whatever, and work with them and sort of figure out what the pieces of the solution are going to be. And as we've said today, it's almost inconceivable to me, at least, that the Zero Trust and the mesh-based approaches are not going to be important parts of that. And going forward, it's just trying to do it with, let's install another layer of firewalls, or let's add a new alerting system. Maybe you should be doing both of those things, but those are never going to be strong enough, systemic enough to really change the game, which is kind of what you need to do.
So flip side question, you keep adding all of this security, and now you're adding friction to the user in terms of their experience. And do you have to just kind of pick a balance point and say, well, I can only, I just have to live with something, live with a certain level of risk, because my customer will only accept a certain level of friction, or my employee will only accept a certain level of friction in terms of using my systems.
Well, if you don't mind me going again, I would almost bite your head off a little bit on that one. I think actually this revolution in security needs to be accompanied with a revolution in usability. And it actually should be, because single sign-on, MFA, web portal access, convenient means of getting data in and out of operations, to and from the cloud, to and from your partners, all of these things can actually be part of this new approach to security. I mean, we've had customers adopt our product because they said, you know what, Duncan, we don't necessarily care that much about cybersecurity, but last month we sent a helicopter to visit our sea-based turbine and wind turbine, and they arrived there and they've forgotten to bring their spreadsheet of passwords with them, so they had to fly back to the shore to actually remember what the device passwords were on that turbine. Well, if you had a real single sign-on system, they would never have those kind of problems, nor would they have the problems of, I have to set up my VPN connection to get into that particular substation, which is creating an attack vector in itself. And so the great thing about implementing a powerful set of security paradigms is you can also use it to dramatically simplify the user experience. And in fact, it's actually necessary cyber-wise to do that, because as Ben hinted at, one of the reasons why vulnerabilities happen is because it's all too complicated and people make mistakes. So you have to kind of simplify that administration and the technician experience, at least in my opinion. I should let somebody else talk to this as well.
If I may, just adding on to Duncan's previous comment, I agree with him that, ransomware, I mean, the news is amplified every day. And, there are so many businesses who don't see any, because they have good cyber security hygiene, good controls. And I would say, these things are very simple ways to avoid. It's whether it's just a clicking on a malicious file, multi-factor authentication, having good backups that are offline, having good incident response plan. So even if you're being attacked, how do you minimize the damage and not have to negotiate with the threat actor? And by the way, not every threat actor is very sophisticated, right? Sometimes even their decryptors don't work, or they're very slow, and you can't really get the data backup and data restoration done in a rapid scale that you need for your business to perform. But this battle of ransomware and the businesses who are actually doing a really good job. I mean, I can't really throw a ton of metrics, but we have less than 1% claims reported ratio on our book. And that means a good 99% of our policyholders are doing a really, really good job in maintaining that posture. Now, you are more vulnerable tomorrow than you are today. And so I think we all agree to that. But folks are doing, we got to give credit to folks who are doing really good job in just basic cybersecurity awareness training, or things that would get into this bigger situations. Or we got to give credit to the businesses who are doing a really amazing job in maintaining their posture against the threat landscape.
Thank you, Jack. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I was just going to add, one thing I'm disappointed in, since we are on June 24th, and a lot of the way this ransomware has been going has been through Windows systems, and I really had some high hopes for the Windows 11 rollout today to have more in it around security and controls that I thought were going to be effective against some of this, whether it's containers or more levels of permissions, things like that. I didn't see that, at least in some of what I've read about so far today, and so that's a little disappointed that we're potentially seeing this next generation of Windows, and right now I'm not feeling like we're going to be better off than we are today.
On that happy note, I think we have a number of questions in the Q&A section. I'm not going to go in order, but I'm going to go in order of interest to me. So Eric asked a question: what role does the US government or SLG have in preventing critical infrastructure attacks, national security, versus commercial interests? Where is the FBI in this process?
So I can take a stab at that. So I think government definitely has a role, and there's been considerable coordination between especially like the electric sector and other sectors as well, and the government in trying to understand how to combat these attacks. One of the frustrating things is there's limited things that everyone can do, because the government can't know everything, and then at the same time, there's the government has limited capabilities on what they can do to go after, people, even if they get identified, because many times they're in other countries, and we face the challenges of extradition and politics and all of those different things. So there's lots of challenges there. I think we've seen, in the last, with the new administration and the 100-day plan coming out, and the recent executive order, I think we've all seen, good things, at least that from this administration on looking to strengthen those partnerships. So that's a good sign. I think everybody is positive about that.
If I was to summarize, I think your perspective on the role of government is as it should be, at the level that it should be.
I'd agree with that. I think there's people, especially after things like Colonial, are always real big, that we need all this regulation and stuff. But the answer is regulation is really hard to get right, and so if you do regulate, are you regulating the right things? In the electric industry, you have NERC-CIP, which we use to regulate different types of assets of a certain criticality levels, and even that we're on NERC-CIP 7 now. And so that's been something that we've iterated over time. And so having that capability to realize that we're not going to get everything right the first time, and the threats are changing, because before we had just general malware to ransomware, now extortionware, double ransomware, etc. And so making sure that we have that flexibility to add in things, and realize that these things are hard. When attacks are changing as rapidly as they are today, keeping up with them is really challenging. And so I would never want to be in a position where I'm really going after anybody for a lapse in coverage, because these are really hard challenges that the industry faces today.
Makes sense. Duncan, I'm going to direct the next question to you. And there's actually two that are highly related, both to zero trust networking. One is, do you see zero trust becoming the new paradigm for networking design? Traditional network design approaches assumed, a human user and central cloud endpoints, so at a much lower scale than machine-to-machine networks would have. And the related question was around, transitioning from a legacy permissive trust model to, how much effort and cost is required to facilitate a zero trust model. To some extent, is it rip and replace? And do you have to kind of look at an economic cutover point where that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So those are both quite rich questions, I think. Taking the network, zero trust network question, we do draw a little bit of a distinction between zero trust kind of at the application and device level, and full zero trust at the network level. In a full zero trust at network level model, people will have to deeply prove themselves before they are able to get on the network at all. And that is fantastic when you can do it, but it is often impractical in real world operations. And I think that a more realistic approach is likely to be imposing control at the level of individual identities and termination of access. So in other words, give somebody a web page to look at that will let them get at their devices. Don't let them reach all the way to the devices themselves from their laptop or whatever. Because as soon as you give them that direct level of access, then the risk of some malware on their laptop reaching out and suddenly exploring what else it could find on the network gets much, much higher. So we think that the zero trust principles are applicable even if you can't replace the network itself. But there's no doubt that in some environments, certainly certain military environments and others, it actually is worth the investment to fully replace the network infrastructure, and that's great when you can justify that. And, the second question is obviously, as you said, Steve, is related to the first. Is can we ever hope to invest enough to sort of wrestle this complexity to the ground of zero trust? And I think the answer to that is actually yes. One of the goals of companies like Zays is to make it practical to do this, not just to be issuing declarations that we should do it, but actually to make it practical. And it helps to facilitate it that it can and does improve the user experiences, as we talked about already. If your plant manager is having his life or her life made easier, then suddenly the desire to invest becomes greater. It also does underpin innovation. If we have a project at an oil refinery where they're sharing data from the floor of the refinery into the cloud and thence to their suppliers, the suppliers will adjust the mix of catalysts they provide to the refinery based on that data. So there you are actually generating new business models. The suppliers will get paid additional money if they can optimize the distillation processes. But you can only do that sort of thing if you can open up data transfers in real time, are highly secure, and that don't provide a tunnel for attackers to get back into the floor of the refinery. So the innovation in cyber shouldn't kind of be seen as some sort of eat your spinach separate to other innovations that are going on in real world operations. It should actually go hand in hand that we want to be able to do things in new ways. If we're going to do that, then the cyber should be a kind of lubricant for that process of change, not an impediment.
Thank you. That does make sense. Still sounds expensive, but we'll see.
I think we would never call ourselves expensive, Steve, but we like to make it practical for our customers to adopt, both in terms of deployment costs, in terms of making it simple, and no doubt our prices are very reasonable as well.
I wasn't okay. I wasn't specifically singling out Zage. I was just thinking in terms
of course. No, you're right. I mean, a lot of the cost is not actually to do with individual vendors like us, as Ben has said as well. If you have to deploy a wretched bump in the wire in front of every single PLC that you own, that can take forever. Right. So facilitating those deployment costs and management costs often more important than the product costs themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jack, and I think we probably have time for one more question here. So on the cyber insurance side, are you seeing a future where there are cyber insurance riders on home and auto? And
yeah, in fact, I see two questions. Really good question. I see two, and I'll, if you don't mind, I'll take both of them. Yeah, so first we'll go to the NIST. NIST and CIS 20. I mean, those two are extremely, it's core to cyber underwriting today. And when we are looking at all of our data, the 600 plus signals that we look for an individual risk of business, we're really looking at the NIST controls, including the ones that one of our audiences mentioned here. So yes, the answer is yes, we actually look at everything NIST across the 600 plus signals, everything CIS and more. And so you're looking at anything that is combination of outside in. So you get entire attack surface as much you can from outside in, but also inside out. as you start to basically understand chaos behind the firewall. And then answer on the second question about the rider, which Steve, you mentioned. I can't speak to the personal cyber insurance yet. And when I say, I can speak to the commercial cyber insurance. And I will mention why I'm saying that is when commercial cyber insurance started 7 years ago, it was a rider on your business policy, the BOP policy, the business owner's policy. It was in combination with your tech E&O. It was in combination with something else. And over the last 4 years, it had been proven not to be as efficient because the language is not clearly worded. As you know, the insurance contract is a unitary contract. It's you get what you get in terms of a contract. You can't really change the contract. So if the language is not clear in itself, then the claims are going to be hard to get paid. So the market has moved towards standalone cyber insurance product for commercial. And in fact, so this is the difference between packaged cyber insurance policies for businesses and standalone cyber insurance policies, which kind of removes that silent cover. So like things that you don't say about what is covered and what is not. So that ambiguity is kind of removed in a standalone cyber insurance policy, which is where the market is going. And folks like ourselves coming into the market a couple of years ago, offering standalone policy has really driven that notion to its fruition. And I would say that for a personal cyber, there is likely, there are people who offer cyber insurance policies for personal with maybe life insurance policies or some other thing. But if I have to predict that there will be standalone personal cyber insurance policies as a trend more as opposed to attaching it to some other form of homeowners or personal auto. So that just remains my prediction, perhaps, if you will. But we're not in personal cyber, so I can't really 100% say that is what it would be. So I appreciate that opportunity to answer the question, and thank you again.
Thanks, Jack. I would just add a little bit, since my parent company is in the home and auto insurance space. On the home side, there are people that sell personal cyber insurance cover. And obviously it's targeted towards homeowners or individuals. So they cover issues like cyberbullying, and identity theft is also often kind of umbrellaed under there as well. But it also covers the same things that a business cares about in terms of extortion or data breach coverage and those sorts of things. The real question there, I think, is what's the market for it? If a threat actor is going to go where, follow the money, hopefully they're probably going to be going after businesses more so than individuals. But certainly there are products for individuals who have that concern. With that, I would love to thank the panel. So Ben, Duncan, and Jack, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate your insight into kind of the different aspects of ransomware and cyber security in general. And I would love to toss the mic back to Maddie and Ravi.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, panelists, Ben, Jack, and Duncan, for a lively conversation on obviously kind of very topical kind of issues. So we appreciate it. And thanks, Maddie, for putting this whole thing together.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to our amazing speakers and our amazing panelists. We hope to see you guys next week, and stay tuned for more information and more events with the Hive Think Tank. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.